All right, let's get going. Hey, Kayla, I can hear you now. Can you hear us? All right, let's get going. I got a lot to go through, I think, tonight, so I'm really going to speed through this stuff. I'm going to go through kind of a sales update, and then I'm going to take a break and see if there are any questions. Then I'm going to go through editing of a photograph that I've got to work on with you together. Then we'll see where we are at that point. And then I've got a kind of an extension from our last month where we talked about sales and negotiations. I'm going to go through a little bit of the invoicing process that I use because I see different invoice processes from all of you. So, I'm not saying that my way is the best way, but I'll tell you why I chose my method for invoicing and licensing, and then you guys can see if it works best for you and you can dovetail it into your own experiences. So, number one, the big update with AgPix is this. So, I did make, after much thought, I've made a fundamental change in how we're going to roll out AgPix. Originally, I was going to roll out pulling together as many photographers as possible and roll just a big dump of photographs into one agricultural website. I decided not to do it that way. What we're going to do is it's going to be set up in phase one here over the winter months, where it's going to represent all of us together, as well as the Farm Journal Media video and such. And then gradually over the next year, phase two will be incorporating additional photographers throughout the country. So I'm going to pick and choose photographers to be a part of our program, zeroing in on the ones that offer the best portfolios and the best opportunity to work together. And these will be photographers that will also work well from the standpoint of doing, work out in the field, assignment work. And then so we're going to kind of keep it a little smaller than what was originally planned. That keeps the cost down, but it also means that, you guys don't have as much competition from the other photographers that are part of the project. And it gives us an opportunity to grow and kind of spread our wings and kind of manage growth slowly rather than quickly. I made a hell of a career just selling my small portfolio of images. Once we start adding additional photos into the place, it'll expand, I'm not sure exponentially, but greatly. And I'm not sure we need to have a ton of photographers contributing to this to make this a success. So that's the plan with AgPix. Again, the website is basically all designed. And so once this summer gets over here, some of us are wrapping up a lot of work this summer. Now I know, Addison, you start to get busy this winter, but you'll still receive updates on where we stand on that. And then, if it come April, it'll be all set up and ready to go, so you can start uploading images at that time. So no rush with regard to your stuff just yet, but the rest of you will know what's going on. The big news is, in case you haven't noticed, is that the emphasis I placed on pulse crops in the spring has really paid off, and it's paying off dividends not just for this year but for next year. So I landed a big contract with Northern Pulse Growers Association. Some of you have benefited from it already or will benefit from it. In particular, Jessica has, and Miranda has or will, and Addison has. Now the rest of you aren't exactly in Pulse country per se. I think actually, but there's more to come in that regard. So we haven't even chewed up, their budget yet as far as what we're going to do with them. So Northern Pulse Growers is the big one. Then there's the Montana Pulse Crop Committee. They're looking for photographs as well for what they do to market Montana crops in the area of pulse crops. And then we've got a lead that I'm going to try to close this week with the American Pulse Association. They market themselves under the title USA Pulses for a job there. So that's just a start. It's obvious to me, and I thought it was obvious last spring, but it's becoming even more and more obvious that there's no one out there that's really covering this particular niche within the agriculture industry. And once they started seeing photographs come through, they were being shared across the industry, and I've got people knocking on the door. I've even got a lead that I'm pursuing up north of the border in Canada. So we're going to continue the emphasis on pulse crops into next year as we have more funding to do some of these shoots, and as the number of clients grows. So what you don't know yet is I will be initiating here probably next month, working with all the editorial organizations that are covering pulse crop news, like in trade journals and magazines, Farm Journal, Miller Magazine, Feed and Grain Magazine, Pulse Crops and Dry Edible Beans Magazine, and a magazine that's published by USA Pulses called Take Your Pulse. And I'm going to be trying to then try to get our wiggle into getting editorial income from these shots, and then planning our 2024 shots in that regard. And there's still some trade associations and other people, elevators that specialize in pulse crops that I'll be contacting as well. So I want you to be thinking about, as we enter the winter months, what growers are in your area that are growing pulse crops, because we're going to be covering all the aspects of it next spring, everything from planting to spraying to their growth, doing as well, what do you want to call it, doing some photo assignment work with people consuming them, with models and such. So we're going to cover the entire industry. So, but in particular where you're located, if you know anybody who's growing, dry peas, beans, any legume at all, make a note of it so that you're well positioned to get a piece of this pie come next. Well, what remains of it from this year, for many of them, their budget cycle runs until July or end of June, pardon me, and then the new budget cycle starts again in July. So we'll be busy doing a lot of pulse stuff again in 2024 is the point. Department of Agriculture got the okay for the sale for their calendar. I got a conference call with them tomorrow to finalize things there. Some of the shots that you guys have been taking this summer will be in there, especially the pulse stuff. So it's paying off there too. And more news on that after I get my meeting with them done this week. The other good news is that I think we talked about grants, filing for grants with them. It turns out that we're not the best application for the grants. However, it opened the door for the Department of Agriculture to say, it's still important for us to get these photos and stuff. So my meeting also this week is to discuss, they will provide funding. We don't know exactly how much it is yet, but it's going to be pretty much on par with what we were talking about for the, what do you want to call it, the grants that I was going to try to pursue. So we're going to have a body of money next year, more sizable than we had this year, where you'll be paid to go out and shoot photographs. So I'm excited about that. I'll have more details on that, but that's we've got two big jobs already lined up for 2024, and so that's not common. So that's the good news there. You're starting to see, and the rest of them will be coming through shortly, photo calls for the different travel regions in the state. So those, when you get those from me, and I'll point them out to you in email when I share them with you, you go ahead and feel free to file directly with them. You don't need, that's not something I'm going to take a piece of. That's something that you guys can submit photographs on your own to them. So, but keep in mind, you only want to send them your very best stuff. If that means, honestly, that you think you only have something that you deem to be magazine worthy or travel journal worthy, then just submit like 1 or 2 images. Don't inundate them with crap, because it's a fire way for them to say, we don't need any more photographs from you. So just send your best stuff. You have to be a curator, right? Casting a wide net on those photo calls isn't going to help you get work. You're going to be better suited if you just give them your very, 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 very best stuff. All right. So keep that in mind. That also includes, there was a call for like calendars, 2024 calendars, things like that. I'll pass those on to you guys, and the such. We got an increasing list of farm equipment providers who are going to be, who I'm working with. I'm closing a sale with one now, hopefully close that tomorrow. And another one that we're currently working on. But my emphasis over the winter is going to be focusing on more farm equipment clients, because they pay pretty good. And there's a lot of those, in Montana, North Dakota area that, and elsewhere, where they might fly us in to help photograph them. So that's going to be a big emphasis for me in the coming months, is to land some more clients in that regard. Still expecting some work from United Grain Corporation and the grain elevator companies. I don't want to get a client that competes with them. So I'm kind of avoiding some of the companies that have elevators in Oregon, Washington, and Montana. But there's room for us to do work with some others, like out in North Dakota, and maybe some of the other ones in the area that don't compete directly with their elevators. So I'm working with a couple clients right now, trying to get them to bite, and we'll see where that ends up. I do have a presentation on Monday of next week with United Grain Corporation with regard to a social media project that I've been working with them hand in hand. What does that mean for you? It means that they're going to be buying more photos. So we're going to be doing some social media work with them, helping them create social media posts and such. And they will also be buying reels, videos as well. Both those that we concoct using stock video and photos, but also if you're interested, if you are into making social media, and I can honestly say that I am not, then you'll have a great opportunity to, go out and work on stuff like that. Editorial wise, Big Sky Journal. When I get photo requests on that, I'll be sharing them with you guys. Distinctly Montana, I'm still trying to pin them down on a calendar of things. They do not seem to be they don't like. What I was hoping to do is create a calendar of events of things that they wanted to have published, and they keep changing it. So I'm not sure if I'm gonna be able to do it. The way it looks now is I have a list of everything that we've talked about before, and then every month or every issue when it comes up that they're looking for stories, I'm trying to pitch them. So, but having advance notice a year in advance doesn't look like that's going to be feasible. So, but that doesn't mean to say we won't keep getting work from them. We just had some stuff published in I believe it's this fall issue. I haven't seen it yet, but and we're just going to keep working in that regard. So if you got ideas for the spring, the big sale that's going to be, the big article I do know about that's coming up is an article about what's called the Theodore Roosevelt International Highway. Just so you know, it was a highway that once stretched from basically Astoria in the state of Washington to Acadia National Park in Maine. And of course, the biggest swath of it was through Montana. And it is essentially, well, it isn't just essentially, it is basically Highway 2 through most of those states. And it went up into Canada, in fact. So the article is going to focus around the history of the highway and how there's talk about bringing it back. And so if you have any photographs along Highway 2 in Montana, then, in the communities along Highway 2, let me know, because they'll be looking for them. If you have, by chance, any of you have vacationed in Astoria, or in, Portland, Oregon, or Portland, Maine, or Niagara Falls, or Duluth, Minnesota, any of those other places, I'll send out an email about where the route was, and then you guys can, if you have any, if you were on vacation or something or visiting relatives and you happen to have photographs in those other places, they'll be interested in licensing those as well. Range Magazine, they've been focused on their website development, so I haven't been getting much work out of them just lately, but that there'll always be new stuff coming out from them. I'll keep you posted. Again, as always is the case, if you know some like historic ranch in your area, if you know a rancher who's like, has a very photogenic family, to feature their operations in the magazine, then let me know. That's very useful, and that's how I can get jobs for Range Magazine. And then for this next year, be thinking about any historic ranches in Montana, because distinctly Montana likes to feature a historic ranch once a year. And I'm doing more work with the other trade journals. This winter, I'm also working on a real estate photography website that's exclusive to that. More on that later. And this winter work, one of the projects I want to work on with you guys, most of you except for Addison, have more time in the winter. The next meeting, just so you know, I'll be going over with you how to sell your fine art prints online with a system that I know that works because I've been using it for 10 years, and how it ends up getting me more work as a result of it. So, but we'll talk about that more next meeting, since we have already too much on the meeting already this schedule. So are there any questions about this stuff I just went through? All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is pull up a photograph, and I'm going to pick up the easy one first. Share your entire screen. And I'm waiting for Photoshop to load. All right. So this is a photograph that Jessica took. First things first, she took it with a drone, obviously. And if you haven't worked with a drone, you should know, and Jessica already knows this, is that I'm not sure if the right word is to use resolution. Resolution isn't the right word to use technically, but the crispness and the clarity of a drone shot is not as good as it is on one of your Canon or Sony cameras. It just isn't. But most of that is only recognizable when you're editing it. So to the actual customer, they don't see it as much. It's more subtle. But it does exist. It is there. So the aspect ratio is also different than what you might be accustomed to. It's more of a 16:9 aspect ratio. I struggled with this a little bit in editing some drone photos because I'm so used to a 3:2 aspect ratio, and I didn't know what to do with it. So I basically am leaving it the way it is, and if I have to crop it down, or most of my stuff I do, I don't know if you've noticed, but I do almost everything in a 3:2 aspect ratio, because it works well in prints, it works well in magazines. It's the one aspect ratio that is it casts as wide a net as possible for additional work. So I just opened up here in Adobe Camera Raw. Unlike Canon, it doesn't really give you a profile to be able to borrow from. So I may dip into that later. That's what this little 4 square areas in here. So I'm going to go toggle through this first for white balance and see which one I like. Daylight's too bright, which means, or orange, which means I already know cloudy is going to be. Flash can make it look a little too green, and it is. So auto is probably where I'm going to want to start. Now the blue is a little suspect over here. But again, why I like this is that the grain, in this case, it must be peas, isn't as oversaturated, and the blue sky is more blue. So that's why I like this. You'll already see here, I don't know if you can see this where my icon is, there's a little white dot here. And so this is a bit of an anomaly, I think, on the sensor on the drone. So I already know that I'm going to have to clean that up. The first thing I also notice here is the horizon, which this isn't a complaint. I want you to be aware of that. We all do it. Every photo it's rare I find a photograph where I don't have to crop it because of the canted angle that is the horizon. You generally want, 99% of the time, you want your horizons to be as straight as possible. That's just humans prefer it that way for whatever reason, whatever it is. Then the other thing I'll notice here is that the shadows aren't too bad. They might have to be opened up a little bit. But other than that, what I want to do is get the color of the grain so it looks good and it matches the sky as much as possible. And I want to see how I can play with the exposure to accentuate this plume of chaff that's coming off of the back of it. The other thing I'm going to do is try to, one of the things I do with harvest shots involving combines, up here in the top in the hopper where they're collecting the wheat berries, if it's wheat, or in this case the peas, I always saturate the mound here so it's more obvious. It's subtle, but it's enough because I don't want to be lost that there's grain up here when doing the shot. So I've chosen this now. First thing I'm going to do is look at the exposure. Here I'm looking at the histogram. Some of you, by the way, I've noticed, I don't think you guys use your histogram on your camera. I think that's, again, this is how I shoot, but I think that you should get in the habit of doing that. I think using it takes a while to get accustomed to the use of it, but you should really think about, not that you rely on it, but you should get in the habit of knowing what it means, and it really does change how you edit photographs, and just keep that in mind. It tells you a lot. It looks technical, but it doesn't have to be. It's you're taking a view of it from basically 60,000 feet above. You're not going into every detail you see in a histogram, but it really does help to know your histogram and how it affects your exposure. So, for example, here on this image, first thing I'm going to do is move the exposure slider, try to get all of this information into the middle. The start doesn't always work this way, but I try to get it as in the middle of the graph area as much as possible. Then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, and again, this is no scientific way, it's just me using my eye to kind of determine what looks like the best exposure on this. So I'm looking at the shadows first. I'm trying to determine, do I want to close them down? And I kind of do, I think, because if I take them all the way down to the bottom, which I'm not going to go with, it accentuates this plume cloud a little bit more. So I'm going to adjust the shadow. And I also want to accentuate these shadows because that tells a really cool story. Now, some photographers will go to extremes. I'm not going to do that. I like things usually kind of down the middle, but I kind of want to accentuate that stuff. Now I'm looking at the whites in the sky, and I want to dumb that down a little bit. So I'm going to play with the white a little bit, which overdoes it, but I want to dampen down the whites in the sky to accentuate the sky as much as possible. Never touch the clarity slider. If you use it, it just adds noise. It doesn't really do much in that regard. Dehaze does work, but see what it does? It oversaturates. So if I use it, I only use a little bit of it. And then I'm going to go back up the shadows again, because when I lightened this, now it darkened it a little more than I would have liked. So I'm going back now and I'm adjusting shadows again. And it gives me a nice middle point. And the reason why I don't rely on this so much is because what we're about to do with it here in a little bit. Next thing I do is, and you'll see what I'm talking about in just a little bit. So now I'm going into my color mixer, and this is where I kind of deal with the colors as much as I can. First thing is the most predominant color in here, and it's yellow and oranges. So I'm going to change the hue on this as much as I can. I'm probably going to start with orange and see what works. I tend to like lean on being more amber than yellow in my harvest shots, regardless of what it is. I just think it looks better. But again, this one's kind of about where it needs to be anyhow, so I'm not too worried about that. Now I'm going to see what yellow does. Yeah, I'm going to, so here I'm moving the yellow just a little bit more to make it a little more orange. Greens are in the combine. It's a John Deere. So I'm going to try to move those to the right, because as I move, remember, green has a lot of yellow pigments in it as far as Photoshop is concerned. So when I moved, when I messed with the yellows in here, I'm also messing with the tone in the combine. So I'm moving that a little bit more to the right. And this also has aqua in it. If you move that to the right, it'll affect that a little bit too. The blue is a little odd because it's the drone, I think. So I'm going to try to, where I normally would move this to the right. Well, I don't know. It's so hard on the drone. It doesn't do it like it does on a Canon. But I'm going to probably leave it there. The one thing it's darker here than over on the right. I'm going to try to fix that and to balance that in what I'm going to do next, but I'm not sure if I can. There's really no other colors to worry about here, so I'm going to open this. Now first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to affect the crop. I'm going to start by turning it. And then for good measure, I'll grab my balance tool here and just draw a line. And then I'm going to look at straight lines on the image. In this case, it's the header on the combine. Okay? So you'll notice that this line here, it's got a little bit more of the header here than it does here. Because in addition to the combine, right, they're going to be looking at this header. And I also want to see if this is the kind of image that begs to be centered. So now I'm going to move my crop where it's kind of where the combine's right in the center. And then I'm going to drop it down rule of thirds where the bottom of the combine's on that top line, on this line here, using good rule of thirds. And then I'm going to adjust a little more to the left. And then I'm going to probably adjust this again, because it's easier for me to fix the sky, I think, through stretching than it is here. So I'm going to go back now and twist this so the header is straight. So here it's right, real pretty straight right there, okay? Now I'm going to hit enter to crop it. Now we still have the problem of the horizon, right? So I'm going to drop down a guide so I know what I'm dealing with here. I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to go into transform, pre-transform, skew. And so this allows me to lift corners. So I have to be careful. I'm watching this while I'm doing it because I don't want to change that. Too much. But I pick up the corner and I adjust my horizon that way. Now, in doing this, it shifts the top of this thing a little bit to the left. So I'm going to pull it back a little bit. Not much. to pull it more tight to where it was. Then I'm going to drop a line in the center again. You guys, that's the center of the photograph. You can see it's off. So now I'm going to move this layer so it's back in the middle again. Easy to do on a John Deere because the GPS unit is always right in the middle of the cab. And I'm going to tweak it one more time. Edit, transform, skew. Just a notch. Done. Now, what you want to be careful of, so you can see this is where it is now. This is where it was before. Now, before. And it's really a world of difference. Now, because I moved this to the right, I need to go in and zoom down here and see if there's, you can see this line right here, right? So how do you fix that? So what I'm going to do is, this is probably isn't the best way to do it, but it's a quick way. I'm going to flatten it. And right on that line where it is there, I'm going to grab it. Make sure I did. And then I'm going to go edit, fill, content to where. Select, deselect. And it milled it, the line disappears. Except that this thing here looks different. So I'm going to take my clone stamp, continue this line here myself. I'll get rid of the one up here and I'll continue the line here. I'll get rid of these lines here. See, it's broken here. So I'm going to extend it here. And the rest of it's fine. Now, I'm going to look at it 100%, and you can tell the sky is noisy. So I want to clean that up next. First things first. Get rid of this. For some reason, there we go. So I'm going to grab the blue sky. This is relatively easy to do, and this doesn't have to be precise. I'm going back up to my camera raw filter, camera raw filter, and okay, you good. You can't see that, and I'm going to zoom in, and then I'm going to detail, noise reduction. I'm going back up to the front, and I'm dropping texture and clarity to clean up the noise. I'm going to go back again. There's still a little bit of noise. Color noise doesn't change much, so you might as well just amp that all the way up to the right when you're dealing with skies, and then add a little more noise reduction, and then I'm okay. And then you'll see sky is not muddled anymore. Select, deselect. Now, there's this orb here. Probably a sun glare, actually. Edit, not a sensor problem. I misspoke. Select, deselect. It's gone. Now I start looking for things that jump out that have no business being there. One is whatever this is. I get rid of it because it distracts the eye from what's in there. Then there's like clumps of weeds out here in the field. I get rid of those. And start scanning for like dust spots on the sensor, anything else. This kind of thing out in the background, little white building, remove that. Those colorful, whatever those are, can stay. These little dots, I get rid of them. And I generally will scan the whole image at 100%. Okay, now because it is so what makes this shot nice is if I crop it at 8.5 by 11, it makes a good cover. So that's the beauty of this, is this makes a good cover shot. This area up in the top is great for the header on the magazine, and there's plenty of negative space here to put, what's inside type of thing. So this is great for that type of perspective, but that's not what we're doing today. What we're gonna do now is I'm gonna double check my exposure by going to, this is my neat little trick, levels. I hold down the Alt key and hit auto, and it gives me really good options as far as exposure is concerned. And this is usually the best. I'll see what this looks like. I like how it dampens down the saturation a little bit, but I can do that separately. And then I hit OK. And it's just a much more vibrant shot. It might be a little too much, so I dial it back just a smidge. But it's much better in that regard. And then just as a sanity check, I always check the contrast. And again, this part is the most unscientific thing I ever do. It's just an eye test. I feel it has enough contrast, but if you edit on photographs, like say you're doing 30 at a time, over a cast of 2 or 3 hours, sometimes your eye becomes acclimated to the image, and you need to double check that you're seeing things. So I will check this thing to see what it perceives as the best contrast for this image. And you'll see this is radically different than what we had. Here's where we were. Here's where we are. Now, I got to tell you, this is a lot contrasted, but I can see where it's going. I prefer to have a little more blue in the sky. So maybe the brightness thing, but I mean, so I'm not crazy about this at all, but it tells me that maybe I should, since it's so out of whack, I should play with this a little bit and dial up and then remove the opacity on it a little bit and see if that helps it. And it does. I think it does. This is without. And you can't see it as well on your screen, but it does help. So I'm glad in this particular case, I'm glad I did it. I kind of wish the sky was a little more blue maybe. That's easily solvable by clicking the layer down below, grabbing the eye, softening the edge a little bit, click OK, and then click the layer above it and edit, fill, black. Select deselect. And you can see it changed just the foreground. So I kept my blue sky, which I wanted, and I just changed the contrast here. And now I'm probably going to dial back just a little bit more. There. Flatten. Last step, sharpening. Now I typically would only do this for the final output, but since we're here, this one needs sharpening. So if you go to 100%, it's a little muddled. Drone cameras generally are, the consumer ones. So again, high pass, filter, other, high pass. Only dial this up so you're seeing just the image, but not any halos around it. So I'm checking there's no halos. So this is about perfect at 1. And then I go to overlay. And I'm toggling back and forth, and it really does, in this case, really sharpen up nicely. I'm going to dial back just a smidge. Now, that's done. 2 last steps. I'm going to grab my sponge saturation. I'm going to saturate the mound up here again. Just quick. Doesn't have to be too fancy. And then I'm going to grab, and they always tell you never sharpen on Photoshop. Well, using the sharpening tool. I also noticed, what the hell is that? Oh, that's the side mirror. It got hit by the sun. Interesting. So I'm going to sharpen up a little minor things. I'm going to try to sharpen up the logo as much as possible. The lights, there's not much. This is over 100%. This is 100% here. There's not much else I can really sharpen except this. This fell out of depth of field. So I'm going to sharpen this a little bit more out here than I would the rest of the image. And then I consider this kind of done. Now, another thing I like to do, by the way, is I go in here and I grab my saturation tool, and I'll toggle the hue back and forth to see if I like. See, this is to the right, so you're adding more greens, and this is the left, adds more orange. And I got to tell you, I kind of like more orange. This is where it is. There's more orange. These are better complemented colors. Maybe it's a little too much. Done. File, save as, underscore, edited 1. And this is my workflow. It doesn't have to be yours. I always save as a TIFF image, 16-bit TIFF image. Save. Done. Done. Questions? No questions.
Actually, just general question. What makes you prefer the TIFF image?
TIFF image, okay, so files are stored in different, I'm not sure the exact definition of all this, but a JPEG is an 8-bit image, okay, which means it's doesn't have as much detail, doesn't have as much color, it's not as clear, it's not as granular with the data that's contained on it, whereas a TIFF image and a PSD image, which is a file extension for Photoshop, and a DWG, which is an Adobe RAW format, those all are 16-bit files, which means there's much more data, it's much more clarity, much more resolution, and it's just a better overall file. And it's not what's termed as a lossy, that's made up word, but everybody uses it in the industry. It's not a lossy file format. So if I keep making changes to a TIFF file, it doesn't change the quality of the image. Okay, it remains the same. Whereas an 8-bit file, if you keep making changes to a JPEG, it will, every change you make to it, it starts to lose its luster. The analogy I can best use, or metaphor I can best use, is if you go to a copy machine and you have a photograph and you put it down on the, or any document, and you put it on a copy machine and you make a copy of it, and then every time you keep making a copy of the copy, it gets worse and worse and worse and worse. Whereas with the TIFF file, it maintains its luster. You want to have a master file. So I have basically 3 kinds of images on my server. One is the raw file that comes out of the camera. I never mess with that. The raw file I call that my, like, if you want to think in analog terms, and to some of you younger people, you don't know what was like film, shooting with film probably ever. But when you shot with film, you had a negative of whatever you shot. So I liken it to that. Your raw file is your negative. You never touch it. It always remains the same. That's your baseline, and you never delete it. You don't crop it. You don't do anything to it. You leave it the way it is. Then your next file, you edit it. That becomes your master edit. Ansel Adams did that with his analog stuff. He took his negative, stuck it into a projector, applied the light to a piece of photo film paper, and then he manipulated it using all kinds of tools and gadgets. And then he took a picture of his manipulation of the photograph, and that became his master image. Your TIFF file is your master image, okay? It's the one that now you may go back and create another version of it. That just becomes another master image of your original RAW. But your TIFF image, where you're done editing it, you don't plan to do any more re-edits to it. It remains your master photo after it's been edited. Then your JPEGs are what you send to clients. So in this image, let's say Successful Farming comes and they want a cover shot. Boom. I output this to them for their cover shot. That's JPEG number 1. Then I've got a website, or let's say Montana Department of Agriculture wants to use it for social media. Well, they don't need to have 6,000 pixels on the long side. They can get by with just 2,048 pixels. So that's a resolution of, I think, a 4K monitor. So I'm sending them an image that's only 4K resolution. That's JPEG number 2. Then I have one that's going to be used in a calendar. Okay, so when you send, or a print, and that's going out to someone for Fine Art America to send as a print. Well, you tend to want to sharpen images for print just a smidge more than you do for web use. And so that becomes JPEG number 3. So every time it goes out to a new client, it becomes JPEG 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And you include in the file MT Agriculture Calendar. You put the name of how each one of them is different. And so that becomes each of the uses for it. And the crops that you make and the sizes of it and the whole 9 yards. And then then it also makes it simple. So when somebody comes calling for basically the same type of image you sold to another client, you just copy into the file structure and paste it and change the name, and you send it off to them rather than having to open it up in Photoshop or Lightroom again to re-edit it or to resize it or whatever it is you do. Another example, which we're not going to get into this now, but I have lots of clients that, for example, want something large. Well, I use something called a blow up. So let's say like Billings Clinic comes and they say they want a wall that's 12 feet long and 8 foot high. Well, there's not enough pixels here. This thing here only has 3,300 pixels. So I have to resize it. So what am I going to change it to? Well, let's go into inches. So at its needed resolution of 300 dpi, the largest this would print as is only 11 inches by 6 inches in size. So what do? I want to go 12 feet wide times 12 inches is 144. So this program allows me to go 144. Oops. Well, you get the idea. So it enlarges it. Now, if you zoom in 100%, it's a little bit more muddled, but it's a far greater place than it'd be if you stretched it. If you stretched it and printed it, it's going to look like this because there's not enough pixels here. This takes your original file and enlarges it to whatever size you want it to be. So, so if somebody comes in and you want a 20 by 30 print, that's what I use. And then I go through the sharpening sequence all over again. But we'll get into that later. We're not going to get into that now. When we get talking about the fine art, selling prints of this stuff, I'll get into some more details about how to do that. Okay, so that's that image. Now, any more questions about the editing? We're going to try to hurry up and get one more editing in, so I'm going to go through this pretty quick. I don't know if I should. We've already been on here an hour. I'm going to show you what we're going to go through next time, and then I'll edit one more photograph since we're here. Okay. I was going to try to do this tonight. I know it was stupid to try, but so let's see. View, zoom, 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 zoom. I thought I could zoom. I'm still getting used to. How come I can't zoom? Whatever. Anyhow, so I was going to pick up from a negotiation last time and talk about licensing and photos and invoicing. So I'll go through step by step my process for the invoice process that I use. Again, doesn't mean to say you have to follow my process, but I think you might get benefit from that. And the terms that I apply, both in the form of my license as well as how I hasten the process for payment and whatnot. So we'll go through that next time, okay? Since we'll get into, I think I got a lot of positive feedback at the last discussion about negotiating with clients. So I figured we'd continue doing some more of the business related stuff as well, which I know I'm giving you a lot of trade secrets. So I'm begging you guys not to use it against me someday, meaning don't go out there and compete against me is what I mean to say. So let me open up another image. This one I can tell is going to be harder to edit a little bit. So this is another image. It's a great shot. It's one of those shots that happens at dusk when you have lots of bright lights and lots of dark areas. So you're trying to balance between the two. I could say right off the bat that if this had been taken with a Canon, my Canon, it'd be a lot easier to edit. Okay, so here we're dealing with some problems like these blown highlights here, and that's going to happen even with a Canon camera. But you're going to have a lot more leeway shooting with the DSLR or mirrorless camera than we're going to have here. But we're going to make best of this and work the best we can. So here the mound is the data is already pretty much in the mound. And what's the beauty of this is it's not even clipped. These little arrows up here will be, you'll watch, they'll turn color if it's getting to be too dark. If I go to the right, you can see that it turns. It says I'm clipping. I have areas in here that are pure black. That's not good. And I can go all the way to the right, and you can see that this right away turns white. That means I have areas that are pure white. That's not good. So we're going to go back to where we're in the middle. I can tell it's already, 0. Right in the middle, kind of where it needs to be. So as far as what you can do, it's perfectly exposed. But it has lots of shadowy areas, which sometimes you want. So I think I probably already edited this one. So let me go back to default settings. Or someone has. Maybe Jessica did. Let's go to where are you? Reset the default. Okay. So these are the default settings. Okay. This is where I'll start. So the first thing I'm going to do is now here we're going to go back to default. The whites are overexposed. So I'm going to dial back just the whites until that thing goes away. Well, it doesn't. So let's try highlights. There. Now let's expand the whites a little bit until we can get away with. That's not going to work. So we're going to go there. We might even go a little further, actually. It'll just help us. All right. Next thing I'm going to do is, well, I'm not going to touch the white balance until I open up the shadows a little bit. So I'm going to go to shadows now, and I'm going to open those up. And I'm going to go pretty far because it's easy. I can go back, right? Because I want to see what I'm doing with from a color standpoint. Now I'm going to go flip through these. Daylight's not bad. Flash still has a little bit of a greenish tint to it. Doesn't work. If there was green grass here, it might be okay. Auto. I kind of like this because I want to see the grain. I want to see that this is, yellowish, oranges. But I might dial back the temperature just a smidge. Okay. Now blacks adjusting the blacks sometimes works both ways. It's different than opening up the shadows, right? Blacks affects just the darkest of shadows. So sometimes you go opposite. You're increasing the shadows, which is kind of affecting more the midtones, and you're affecting the blacks means basically the darkest of colors, or darkest of pixels in your image. So sometimes like here, I'll take my blacks all the way down as low as I can, and then I'll, open up the shadows because this gives me more contrast. And I kind of like that. So exposure, the blacks are maybe a little too far, and the whites are still there. Yeah, not bad. Now I'm going into my color mixer, and now I want to open up the luminance of just the oranges, which I may not be able to do because it'll affect this up here. So let's try the yellows first. So now I'm making the yellows stand out a little bit more. Okay. And then I want to saturate them because they kind of get lost. And I'm going to change the hue. I'm going to make them more orange. Now here, I'm getting some ramifications from changing the highlights so much. So I'm starting to get some weird effects out there. So I'm going to have to work on that sky. I want still the clouds to kind of stick out. So I'm going to dehaze a little bit. This is a hard one. Now I'm going to play a little bit with these different tones to see if something works better than what I've done. This one's not bad. That one's not bad. Ugh. This doesn't make a best photograph, but it'll make it easier for me to edit. All right, so now what I'm going to do is now I'm going to get unconventional. This may not work, okay? So now I want to work on that sun. So I want to bring back the orange in that area there. A hint of it, what it was, but not quite as much. Then I want to grab the foreground without the circle, feather. Yeah, we're getting someplace now. And then I'm going to grab the sky. Without the circle. So I'm going through here and I'm grabbing the area I kind of grabbed before. I want to include it. And I'm softening the edges again. Feathering it a little bit. Now this sometimes works, sometimes it doesn't, so don't hold it against me if it doesn't work. I'm going to go grab orange. I'm going to slide this so it's the same tonal quality. Move it into blue. Edit, fill. Select, deselect, color, and dial it all the way back. So I made it more purple. There's blue in it, but it's not as like just solid. It adds a difference between the two. I don't know. I'm losing it again. Edit. I might try another trick I use is, and I don't like using this a lot, but sometimes this I want differentiation between the sky. Okay. So I'm shift edge. Yeah, it didn't work. So now I'm going to affect the foreground one more time. And I'm going to do my trick with exposure, alternate, click Alt. There, that one works best. Usually does. I think what I'm going to do is grab my selection tool. This is I don't know if this works or not. I'll tell you why I'm doing this in a second. More of the sky, a little more feather. Edit, fill, color. That's not right. Edit, fill, select, deselect. Yeah, it didn't work. Maybe a little bit will work, but not as much as like here. I have this, I have this technique. It's probably stupid, but I haven't been called on it yet. Okay, and I think it works, but not always. So, how many of you guys have noticed, like you're in your car, right, or your automobile? If you're looking through the windshield, right? Now, they used to do it a little bit more goofy in the 80s and 90s, but on the top of your windshield, I don't know if you're aware of this. Some people aren't. The top of your windshield has a gradient applied to it, so it's a little more darker or bluer at the top. Does anybody not know what I'm talking about? Um, so at the top here, you have this shading at the top. They're tinted at the top. They're tinted and they're darker at the top. So I've learned that if you have a sky that's kind of blown out, kind of goofy, that if you do the same thing, I don't know if this is even, I don't know. I just do it and it works. I don't know if it's instinctive or why it works, right? But it just does. And I'll go through, and this is one of those dirty little secrets, where if you just darken the top of it sometimes, it helps make the sky not look so, I don't know, it just helps. And so this one isn't the perfect example of that, but if you have a sky that's largely like white, and then you add a layer of like a thin, right, a gradient, so it tapers off into the white, and just a strip at the top, it really can help your images, I think, look pretty good. So this isn't one of those, but I mean, I hope you guys experiment with that and see if you guys agree. But it's always worked well as a technique for me. Not always. I'm saying that it's not uncommon, I should say, for it to work well for when you have those type of weird skies. So last, I'm going to do the crop, which I usually do first, but I'm going to slide this in there. You can see it's off kilter again. So I'm going to duplicate. I'm not done with the colors yet, by the way. I'm going to move this into the middle. So rather than deleting top and bottom pixels, I'm just going to leave it there. And then I'm going to grab this, add pixels on the right. And then I'm going to go here and I'm going to delete this part, and this part, and this part, this part. And then I'm just going to go select color range, shadows. And now I'm going to try to open those up a little bit more. Now, whenever you do that, you kind of have to move the midtones to darken the midtones a little bit, otherwise it looks hokey. Yeah, probably dial it back just a smidge there. Now, I'm still not happy with these colors. I'm going to go to saturation. Ugh. Um, what I'm going to have to do here. Okay, this is advanced shit, so please forgive me. There's a tool I use in here that isn't how most people use it. It's called selective color. Okay. This is like art class color wheel kind of stuff. So it's like I want to do surgery on this color, okay? And I have to get into the inner workings of it to really make it change to the way I want it. Just using the basic saturation thing doesn't work. And there's not enough definition to it. There's not as many colors to work with here. So here I'm going to go in, I'm going to grab, it gives you the option to change any of these colors, okay? And so I'm going to grab the yellows, okay? And what I want to do is why is this looking so, it doesn't leap off the photograph enough for me. So there's going to be colors that are going to be hidden in there that I kind of want to get rid of. In this case, I want to get rid of the cyans. There's cyans that are hidden in here. So I move my cyan to the left and it immediately perks it up, right? So it just made it very orange in my selected area here. And I exaggerated it here. In fact, I'm going to, I don't know if I want it to be like that. I'm going to do the whole photo. What the hell? Sorry, this was taking longer than I expected. So I'm going to grab the yellows again, and I'm going to remove the cyan from it. And that makes it more orange. That's good. But now it almost makes it too orange. So I can delete the magenta. Magenta, so cyan and yellow, right, make green. So there was some, I can see some kind of greenish tint in there. So I'm removing it and I'm making it more orange. Well, what makes it more orange? More magenta. So I delete the magenta at the same time, right? And if I want to, I can add more yellow. But now it's looking weird again. So I'm deleting, I want to delete more cyan. And then I can change brightness or, you know, darkness or whatever with the changing the blacks, because that's the only, black and white are the only other, they're not colors. They're either the abundance or the absence of colors. But that's what it works there. And much better. Now it's a little oversaturated, so I'm going to dial back a smidge, but that really helped the color there. And then I have a trick, which most of you won't approve of, but I don't care. I have this little side program. Again, I'm not happy with the sky, so I use this little side program to go in there. There's an effect on here that can fix skies. I'm not suggesting you guys necessarily go out and buy this, but it comes through in a pinch for me. So if I go into miscellaneous effects, here we go. And then I go to deep blue sky. No, it didn't fix it. Cancel. Just going to have to be what it is. So as far as the blown out highlights here, I kind of want to have this this seen a little better, so people can tell that it's a tractor. So I'm probably going to adjust the exposure on just that a little bit. See what I can do. I don't know if I'll be successful. It doesn't hurt to try. Yeah, make it a little bit darker so it looks more like a silhouette. Yeah, that helps. I'll dial it back just a smidge. And lastly, shift mask. Oops, wrong one. Come on. Come on. Alt. Not, there we go. One more adjustment to my levels. There. That's about as good as I'm going to get it. That's my technique for filtering that. You can see there's a lot of noise in here. Again, that's the problem. Noise likes shadows. This is a inherently dark photograph. Not much you can do there. But you can still go in and delete some of it. Really move this color noise thing to get noise out of that. And then go in and sharpen it. What all you can do. So there's that image. Again, it's dramatic, but the sensor on this drone is just, it's not great. So that's part of the problems we're dealing with here. Any questions about that?
No, thank you, Todd, for going through those pictures.
Yeah, no problem. I think that must have been your edit that was on that photograph, huh?
Maybe it took over some of my information. I guess I didn't realize it did that.
Well, I don't know what. Maybe I played with it before, actually. Maybe it was my edit, but whatever the case is, I don't know. This. I mean, it's okay shot. I'm not. It's actually a very dramatic shot. But this is one of those I probably will. If it's me, I go back and I revisit it probably 2 or 3 times before I'm happy with it.
Yeah, I just had a hard time editing it. Like,
well,
like you were saying, you weren't happy with it, and every time I edited it, I wasn't happy with it either. You know.
Yeah, I could see this is a struggle, and it's because of this. The drone camera is just.
Yeah. It's
subpar. I could say with yours, and this is, I mean, it is what it is. That particular camera on your drone compared to the one on my drone is even bad in that regard. There's a world of, because, well, it's only for marketing purposes, so keep that in mind. The camera on my Mavic Pro 2, the so-called Hasselblad, is just a marketing gimmick. Okay, there's nothing Hasselblad about the camera whatsoever. Okay, but it is a better camera, and that's why I'm personally anxious to get a Mavic Pro 3 because the sensor on that is leaps and bounds ahead of the sensor on the Mavic Pro 2, and compared to yours, it would be stunning, the difference.
Yeah,
absolutely stunning. So, and I think you're finding out, and some of you others, if you really want to get into agriculture photography, and I do, when I mean agriculture, and if you're doing cattle, I'm not so sure it is as much value because cattle get spooked by drones. But in the world of crops, drones are helpful. They're very helpful. They pay for themselves after time, in pretty quick order. So, but again, we can get in that more detail some other time. Any other questions about my editing process you need some more clarity on? Okay. All right. If there's none, then that's where we are. Next time I'm going to go through my invoicing process so you can see how I use that for both marketing and for future sales and for getting paid. And the terms and stuff I do in that, and it's also the license. I use my invoice as a license. It makes things easier for me, but it also makes it easier for the client. And it's probably not the perfect way to do a license, but I've never had a problem with it. And I think that the benefits far outweigh the possible negatives. So we'll get into that. We'll edit a few more photographs. And then we'll probably move off to the next meeting, a discussion about selling prints and Fine Art America and Etsy and stuff like that. So, all right, that's all I got. I will have questions. If you guys have questions separately, feel free to email me or give me a call. All right. All right. Talk to you guys later.
Good night,
Thanks, Todd.
everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, Todd.